Okay, here's the painting we're going to be doing next. It's just a close-up of a great blue heron portrait, and it will hold a lot of detail, and more importantly, hold the kind of detail we're going to be working with to actually use the transparency lock layer to our advantage. We will go over all of that here shortly, but what I want to do is just briefly explain. I like to have an accurate drawing when I first start. When I do traditional paintings, I really emphasize a lot on a drawing that it will actually help me, especially with watercolors, that before I commit to color and the actual painting itself, I want to make sure my proportions, my placement is as accurate as I could get it. Now, for watercolors or acrylics, I would actually draw out my subject on a tracing paper, and then this way I can move it around up against the background of the painting itself and just give a good idea of what's going to happen before I commit it to the location I'm going to put it on. Now, digital is a lot more forgiving, and we can manipulate things as we go, but I still like to have an accurate pencil drawing to start out with because it'll usually turn into a time saver, if anything else. Now, this one in particular, let me open up the reference. And this will be our subject here. Now keep in mind, I'll keep this photograph on another monitor so it will maximize our room to paint from over here on this monitor. And what I want to show you though is just the grays and the colors involved. When we start doing some of these long, lengthy feathers that are pretty much almost like fur, that is where the transparency lock can really help us. I will start making all these lines with a specific color and then put the transparency lock on, and then what it'll do is it'll be able to help us in blending colors into those particular feathers that I just laid down. Now keep in mind, I am only going to use my colors, so they will pretty much apply to me and the way I do things. In other words, I won't be pulling colors out of the photograph itself. I like to just work with my traditional palette that I've always worked with, and that is more or less the signature of my paintings. Now, with this in mind, what we could do also is take a look at the grays, and they're going to also come out almost like the grays of my pencil. Now, I always use just a standard gray right here that is my 2H pencil and use that gray for everything. I could have drawn it out with a multiple color or some bright color, but chances are a lot of paintings you have, if you have multiple colors through it, no matter what color you use, you may run into a color pencil that will still be lost somewhere. And that's where the transparency lock can help you also. If we close this out, I could go back to my drawing layer that is just a gray, and I will duplicate it over right down here, and then I'll even turn off the original gray. But now that I have this gray selected, I'll go up to our transparent lock, click it, and then what I will do is actually grab the brush here. It's loaded up completely. We'll grab this permanent rose down here, and what I can do is actually just start painting over just the drawing itself, and I can make it any color I want quickly and easily. And then this way, if I start losing my drawing somewhere and I want to still go by the accurate drawing, then I can actually make it a different color than what I'm working with, and I'll still know where it will be just by keeping the drawings at the very top layers, so you could still obviously see the drawing itself. Now with that said, what we're going to do is fast forward into this painting, and we're going to get a good bit of this done and just get to the point where we could start making our final feathers and then just use the transparent lock, because we won't need it too much before then. This will be just typical blending and just typical shading and just to build the shapes. And what I will do is, just like the shingles on a roof, I'll do this first and then finish this up and then put these white ones down over that. And then these blue ones over here, this like slate gray blue over here, I'll put those on after this is done also. And then these feathers here, I will actually build them up from here and then slowly overlap them from the base. And then as we keep on going, then we could slowly shadow those down. And actually you could see how they are actually brighter at the tips, and then a shade where they go back in underneath the other feathers. That's kind of critical to get those very subtle shadows and shading and values correct, because that's what makes that little tuft of feathers look like a little tuft of feathers. And we're going to try and reproduce this the best we can, and even along with the values of the colors in the actual fleshy skin tones of the bird itself too. Now, I like to work with my own photographs only because I know what lens I took, I know the color values, I know how it's set and everything, so I feel a little bit more confident using my own reference. So with that said, we'll dive into some speed painting, and then we will get some done, and we'll take it from there, and we'll go into the transparent lock, and I will, of course, narrate what I'm doing throughout the speed painting as we go, just to catch some little tips and tricks here and there. Let's get started. Okay, I'm just working in the beak area. The real subtle white textures of just like the frayed beak. I'll put it on its own separate layer. This is what we'll also use the transparency lock for. What I did do, though, was fast forward a little bit and just get us to the point where we could start using some detail. The typical blending of the oranges, yellows, and golds, I went ahead and skipped that. If you want to see a full painting from start to finish on how I plan out a painting, you could visit the mushroom clip here at the button below. But right now I'm just doing the eye and doing the outer perimeter, starting to shade it in, getting to the point where we could start going over some of the detail of the beak and feathers itself. That's where we'll really use the transparent lock the most. Continuing on with the eye, just looking back to see what all needs done back and forth. I like to zoom out just to get a full glimpse of what's going on. Now again, I could do the feathers here right below the beak, and that's only because they will be 100% opaque, so I could even still go back to the background layer and change it around anytime I want. That's not something I would be able to do if it was a transparent watercolor. Even in digital form, I would probably have to mask off the bird itself so the background colors wouldn't bleed through. Let's take a look and see what we got. Okay, let's take a look and see where we're at here. Now, I just finished up the what I call the unbleached white titanium layer, and that's just a real fine, intricate detail on the beak itself, and then also these furry feathers down here. Now, this is where we'll really use the transparent lock. First, I want even to show you that I have the gray drawing layer selected now, and as you can see, I have a little bit of a hard time finding out actually where my pencil lines are. So if I turn on the permanent rose, I could easily see where the drawing is, and then for that reason, I have no problem at all following my guidelines as far as when it's the permanent rose versus the gray. I'll turn that one off. I'll even turn this one off. And what we'll do is we'll go in, and now that I'm still even on the drawing gray, all I have to do is hit Control-Shift, and then I could select the layer I want to work on. If I select that unbleached white, then I immediately go down to the unbleached white. Now, I haven't named that, and I know it was that layer, but once we start building up a lot of layers, that's how we will start finding the areas we want to work on, just hitting the Control-Shift. Now, if I want to blend this white, I have to leave the transparent lock off because I'm going to be changing the perimeter size of these little shapes. Now, just like I did up here, I started softening them up in here and started doing what I wanted to do as far as just blending them out. But now if I want to do that to some of these down here, we're going to be doing roughly the same thing all over. We'll grab our reference here, and we will actually open it up, and then I will actually make it nice and big. And we'll take a look at it. And you could see that one thing we can improve on even in the photograph is that even if this is all just the exact same value the whole way across this area right here, I would rather prefer to even just shade a little bit of this down on top and maybe here in this little crevice right here, just to make it look like it's going around cylindrical shapes and more or less shading it like a cylinder. And then that way there's where we can actually even improve on the photograph itself. And then going back down to here, if we do the same thing with some of these, you could see how they are brighter out here in the front, and then when they start going back in underneath the other feathers, they kind of get lost in the deeper shadowed areas of the colors that are going to be involved. Now these are kind of like a slate blue with a little bit of purple mixed in, and again, I will actually improve that as far as just making a little wee bit more unified as far as where I want to crisscross them and how I want to work on them. Now, if we actually take this, put it back over our other monitor, what I will do first is I'll just grab a smaller brush. This one right here would actually be good, but we're going to turn it way down. Let's grab our little script brush, and it's already set at 5. And then if I even put it on blend right here, I can actually go in and start blending some of these, just like these up in here at the top. These are already softened up and blended out a little bit, so if I wanted to blend this one a little bit, then all I have to do is start softening up the areas, and this will affect everything I have set. If I turn the pressure down a little bit, it'll blend it out a little wee bit slower, and I can actually soften it up quicker, because then I won't be dragging so much paint into my clear area, because this is pretty much almost just an optical mix that I'm not mixing it with any other colors other than just feathering it out into the transparent layer. Now, if I want to start adding colors to this, then what I'll have to do is put the transparent lock on, but I have to keep it off because I'm actually changing the size and perimeter of that paint. So to be able to expand it out, I'll have to have the transparent lock layer off, and then say if we want to shadow this a little bit or shade just some of the white so it's not pure white the whole way across, then what I will actually do is then turn the transparent lock on, and just like this real hard pure white right in here at the top, I will turn the transparent lock on, and then we can actually just go grab a bigger brush, and I'll turn that down just a shade, and then I'll keep the loading real low because I just want to put it on a little wee bit of time. But then what I'll actually do is grab a little bit of cerulean blue, and what I do is mix my blues and my browns to get my grays, but we could just put just a touch of blue down. And now since I have the transparent lock on, I'm only going to be putting blue on that white, and that's it, nothing else. Now if I put a little wee bit of brown in it, depending on what browns I put in, since these colors do mix, I will get my grays, and I change it into a actual blending brush, because keep in mind my rocker, the front rocker is a color picker and the back rocker is actually a blend brush. And then if I pick up color or select a color with out of my palette or with a color picker, then I immediately go back into the previous brush I used, which is very convenient and very quick once I start working. Now if I want to change this around or even put some white back into it, I could do whatever I want and really fine tune that white a lot, because keep in mind we're already at 300%. So once I start tightening this up and get it to where I want at this size, once we shrink it back down, it's going to be, you get to the point where you could barely notice that it is shadowed right in here and it is shaded compared to the pure white. But I'll be able to fine tune all these areas, and that's what I'll do through this whole area, and that will speed paint just to get that behind us so we can move on to something else. Now right now we could do the same thing with these feathers down here. Since I just have a couple started, again I will zoom in, and if we want to just work on these white ones here, then all I have to do is hit Control Shift, and if I select that white one, then I'll go immediately to the neck unbleached white, and that's what they are. And then I'll make the brush just a shade bigger, and then actually I'll select, now this white one is in this area right here, so I'll select this color and then just kind of touch it down. Oh wait, let's put on the transparent lock first. There we go. And then now just touch it down, and that way we will just catch the white, and I could soften these up. And I'll go straight back to a color brush by selecting the color, and then I could change it back to a blender, and I'll blend that white out a little bit just so it looks like it's disappearing back in underneath other feathers. We'll do the same thing down here, but this time I'll pick a new brownish color instead of this purplish color up here, and then just touch it down just a little bit, and I'm working in underneath the grays, so we're not affecting the grays at all. And I could just go to town, so to speak, and just work with the white ones now and tone them down to the point where I could get them making them look like they are going in underneath the gray feathers. And that will give them a little bit more of a rounded appearance that they're actually going around. Because then keep in mind, since these feathers are going around, I might have to shade the values of the feather from top to bottom, but then all of them from left to right. So these might be darker or lighter over here compared to these over here, even though they're still going to be shadowed and shaded from top to bottom. And that's what will make the bird look rounded. But what will make the subtle shapes of the feathers rounded is if I shade the top to the bottom and leave the bottom a little bit brighter to make it look like it's sticking out. Now, if I even wanted these to jump out at you a little bit more, then I can even zoom into them a little bit. And then again, hit Control Shift and make sure we're on the right layer. There's the neck gray. Now I'm working on those, and I'll hit the transparent lock on that one. So now if I want to lighten these up where they come out into the background, then I can actually just take a little wee bit of titanium white, and you'll see that I'll only be able to work just on that gray, and that's it. And if I soften these up, now I can pull some color out of the very tip of the feather, but I'll only be working on just that thin gray line, and that's it. And that way I can make the edge of the feathers jump out at you a little wee bit more than if it was just a solid gray, neutral gray. Same thing with these. If I want to make sure I'm on the right layer, I'll select that, and that is. Then I can actually grab a color up here and then just tone these down. And then once I blend these in, that's how I'll do that. And then after I get this done, I can even start another layer of gray lines, but they will be getting shorter and thinner as I go up the neck. So once I start going up this way, if we pull our reference back in, then you'll see that they are going to get thinner and smaller in size, shorter and thinner as I go up towards the head, until they're finally just very short lines and thin lines. But then I could still just work on those lines. I'll start with a darker background and then take lighter feathers over those and then manipulate each line feather at a time. So if I want these to look more brownish or goldish down here, I can. But then if I want these to look more of a purplish blue up here, I can. But that's all starting off with a simple neutral gray, and then lightening and darkening each of those lines with the transparent lock on whatever layer I'm working on. And that'll be the same thing with these cerulean blue down into cobalt blue, then down into even almost like a Prussian blue, which would be these blues right here. Here's the Prussian blue. That's the French ultramarine. This is the cobalt blue right here, and then that's the cerulean blue. And I'll be using those different blues with maybe just a tinge of brown to gray it down. But I'll be working with these colors or pulling colors right out of my current painting, but those are the colors I only use from the palette. So I won't be pulling out any colors from the photograph itself. And that's, of course, personal preference. You could do however you want, but I prefer to just work on actual colors from my palette. And then if I do start mixing colors, those will be values I mixed just on the painting at the time I mixed them. But let's get some more done, and we'll see how this comes along. And we'll stop again along the way to talk about the fleshy colors and the tight textures I'm going to have, and just to tone everything down. Then once I start working these feathers here, I'll start way back in here and slowly work them up towards the bill. And just like a shingled roof, I'll keep on overlapping them as I go back, and then that will just build the layers of feathers and how they overlap. Let's get some more done. Okay, I'm just working on the gray layers I made 3 or 4 different layers already of just the gray feathers alone, and I'll keep on making more additional layers. That way, if I keep the feathers on their own individual layers, I could go back in and actually highlight or shadow different patches or different areas as I need to. Working with the unbleached white on the beak and then also the cerulean and cobalt blue areas, I'll start to slowly refine the eye and just keep taking my lights and darks back and forth until I'm happy with the actual end result. I'll be looking for something specific, and that's what I'll keep working with back and forth. Even if I need to take colors back in underneath all my detail, I won't lose that detail, and most importantly, the time spent on it, just by being able to go back and rearrange things once the painting starts to come together. I decided to take a little bit of the chin out there, and then that way, just to save some more room to start with the furry feathers. Still working in with the neck. I just finished drawing in the shoulder and added the Prussian blue and the cobalt blue and a little bit of burnt sienna. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. Just moving on. Right now, I'll bring the reference back in, and then we can even see that this part of the neck right in here is actually like a light chestnut color, and I'll get that by mixing my quinacridone gold and my burnt sienna. And then that will help out with that value. That is why I started some of the golder feathers there, the quinacridone gold straight. But then I may have to tone some of these down because they're a little bit too bright white, and they'll jump out at you, just like these white ones here. That if these are around to the back side or to the front of the actual neck itself, I want to tone them down a little bit so they don't look like they're in front of these feathers here. They're back around the back side. So depending on how I put them in, what context I put them in, I want to push them back even though they're white feathers. Once I start getting all these done in here, then I can start with the shoulder area down in here and then slowly overlap them, and then these little S curves here, I want to keep all of this the way it's overlapped just like it is, and then with the cerulean blue highlights on top of these with the darker deep Prussian blue, and I'll even mix in a little wee bit of sepia to make a warmer cool black or dark gray. And then also same thing with up here, I'll work these up, and then once I get back up into here, then I'll be starting to get into the tufts of the real fine feathers, but I'll probably darken everything up a little bit, so when I start taking the lighter colors over that, those will be the final clumps of feathers that you'll actually see. It's just more or less building up layers of paint to where the base layers do make a difference and are important, only because that is what will give the impression of layer on top of layer on top of layer of furry feathers. And then these up in here, I will tone down quite a bit before I start bringing my white feathers off the just the underneath of the beak there, and then that would be it. And I did have to be careful with this right here, because this right here is actually a branch in the background, and that is what I meant by drawing something, and if it conflicts with something in your background and it makes things confusing, then that is what we will take out by eliminating that branch, and then that way, without that branch, the beak will be nice and sharp and easily to see, and we could then make the background any way we want to avoid issues like that. Let's get a little bit more done and see how this shapes up. Okay, just moving on, just still working on the different layers of feathers, just slowly still trying to work to the final layers of feathers that will be the most visible ones. All the other ones will be kind of buried underneath the very top layers. Those are the ones that will create the actual shapes and curvatures of the bird itself. Now just starting to work into the feathers up into the head area now, and then along with still a little bit more unbleached titanium on the actual beak itself. And then now just working in finally with the cheek patch area. The shoulder area I'll be doing a little wee bit different. I'm working in some of the lighter areas that I'll also be putting down the negative parts of the actual feathers when I put in the actual individual veins of each feather. Still blocking in the head, just trying to darken it up so when I start bringing in my patches of white, it'll be ready to go. Working on the beak area and the eye, I decided to change the eye a little bit. I wasn't happy with the technical part of it, so I just rearranged it a little bit. And then I might even put in some Terra Vert later, just to kill some of that real pure cerulean blue. Right now, the highlight went in, and that's just going to be a very subtle sky reflection that won't have a real hard catch light because there's no direct sun out. Working in the shading of the beak, still taking it down a little bit. I work back and forth in different sections just to give myself a break, but more importantly, to be able to come back to a certain area with a fresh look just to see how it's progressing and how I need to take it from there. Working on the back of the neck feathers, I leave them, and then now I'm just going back in, and here's where I'll paint some of those negative areas. Instead of painting the entire feather itself, I'll paint the feather, but then just paint in just a negative area of the feather where the actual feather might be split a little bit. Working in with the textures, all I'm doing is trying to create a linear pattern to all the feathers and then just slowly refining them, where if it's a big wide feather that's kind of glossy looking, then I will smooth that down and soften up the linear pattern. I do want to have a linear pattern, but just not overpowering. There I'm putting a little fuzzy edges on some of the feathers where if they get worn, they start to curl and lighten up just from regular use. And then now I'll start putting in some of the bigger ones. This is actually the time where, again, I just start filling in the linear patterns of each one and try to start with the right colors and the right shapes of each feather. And then later on, I'll refine them more and more. But if I keep them on their own individual layers, I could change what part of the overall shoulder, individual feathers, or even just the shape of the overall bird itself as I need to. Once the painting starts coming together, then I could tell what all I need to work on or what I need to change. If the shoulder isn't looking rounded or if it's looking indented because of the colors I used, then I may have to change it a little bit just to give and produce the shapes that I want of the bird. Working in some of the bigger areas, now I'm just starting to do the Prussian blue feathers, and I'll keep those on individual layers so I could go back in and change the underneath of them if I need to make more darker areas for that, or even just change the highlights and reflected areas of the iridescence. Now I'm just going back in and changing around where some of those Prussian blue feathers came from. Let's stop and take a look and see what we got. We are at the point where we can make very good use of the transparent lock. Okay, let's bring in our reference real quick. And there it is. And now these feathers right here, I will center them up a little bit. You can see how they're highlighted in the middle of the curve, and then they start to get dark again, and some of them get real dark, the ones that are pushed back in. That is where we could really use the actual transparent lock. And I'm going to close this down just a little bit. And if we enlarge this up, you can see I just used a flat bluish gray medium value color for these feathers. But now if I go back up in here to the one I was just working on and hit the transparent lock, now what I could do is go down here and find a nice light blue right here. And then if I go back up in here and put on these light blue highlights, now keep in mind, I don't have to settle for anything. I could go back in, darken this up a little bit, lighten it up a little bit, whatever I need to do. And then right in here also, these right here, well, we'll do like right down in here. And then if I go to the blender, I could take those back and soften them up. And just lightly, what I would call lightly dusting the blend so it just feathers into nothing. And then this way, I could blend the values that I want so it goes back into a darker value, and that'll make that feather recess more. And then these down in here, I could grab another darker color. Let's take that one right there. And then now these are fairly dark, so if I go back in and darken up these, they will jump out at you a little bit more up against the lighter feathers, and then also create that rounded effect a little bit better. And then again, all I have to do is go back in and soften in the edges. And we can even take that a little bit even darker. But you could really see how shading real thin lines works really well with a transparent lock. I'll even try and grab even a darker color here. And just hit the edges. And then take that up in. And then I will actually grab one more dark color and just hit the ends of those. And then take it up to where it'll be rounded, like right up in here, where the skylight, reflected skylight's hitting, and then as it goes down underneath, it's not catching any of the direct reflected light at all. And then even some of these up here, now I can make a couple of different rows, or I should say layers of these, and then that way I could adjust them accordingly. Then that way, these right here are very important to crisscross. I'll crisscross some back across here. And the only reason why is because these feathers are a part of the bird in a specific way that when it folds its wing, this is how the feathers are. So let's try and lighten up these just a little wee bit. And since my burnt sienna colors, like over here, are underneath this layer, then I could go back in and change those as I need to also. But then again, I'm just lightly feathering it out and keeping everything in layers. I could go back in and change things as I need, because I want to see the painting come together as a full entire piece, not just necessary little sections here and there. I'll move this off. We'll take it back down and you could see what a difference that made. Just by putting in those highlights and then making these go dark here, that made a big difference in these feathers. And I'll do the same to some of these, but right now we're just working on these here. We have to still put in these feathers all together, and these are just lightly blocked in. And then here is where I was talking about that ghosting effect. I have to get rid of that white a little bit around the edges of these. These here are a lot different than this one here. This one is intentionally made with a white edge that meets it dark, but this one has a dark edge, then goes light, then goes dark. And that's not something I would want. I'm just trying to duplicate the feathers the best I can. If it's a rounded circular shape feather versus a long and narrow feather, these feathers are all coming from specific parts of the wing, and it's important to keep them looking just like they do. I'm not randomly making up feathers and overlapping them. They are there for a specific reason. It's no different than doing a portrait and pulling out the features of a face that would make that face look like a particular face. Now, with all that in mind, let's go back in and do some more of this. We're going to go back in and do the eyebrow here and start putting in these real fine feathered shapes right in here. These will be coming up here soon, and I'm going to put some dark patches here and there here just before I start putting in the final small white patches of feathers. And then I may clean up the bill again a little bit, and then also I definitely have to put that little patch of preened feathers to pull the down-like feathers at the end of the bill to make it look like telling the story of what it was doing, just standing there relaxing. Let's get some more done. Working in on the shoulder area, I'm just still creating my linear patterns for all the feathers themselves, just to build on, and then I'll go back in and change some of the values. I want this shape to look like an overall rounded shape, cylindrical shape, whatever the case may be. All of the values of each feather have to add up to an overall shape. creating the white edges along the feathers themselves. I don't want them to look too plasticky, so I'll actually tone them down as time goes on. And then I'll also diffuse the edges just to make them look a little bit more fuzzy instead of a solid, hard plastic look. Working around the eye, I'm still blocking in some of the smaller tufts of feathers. What I like to do is step back every now and then and look at the entire painting just to see how my values are shaping up, so I can look at it as an entire piece versus just small little areas here and there. Starting to work in the brow area. Again, I'll put them in lighter than what I need. Then I could tone them down with other given colors. This helps me block in my feathers and pull attention to ones I also want, whether it might be a small little feather out of shape or out of the way. That way I could bring a little bit more attention to it. Refining the neck area, leaving the very last layers for the very tops of the feathers, that these will be the ones that may also overlap 2 or 3 different layers. So I'll keep that as a very top layer so I know it's going to go over all of them. Again, building in on some of the final layers. We'll look at now and take a look and see that this one just about might be wrapped up. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have. This one I think we just about wrap up. Here's our reference right here. I brought it back over. And this is what we have. This is what we were working from. I could even make it just a little bit bigger. Move it up here out of the way. And as you can see, just even the values and the shapes and tones we were trying to achieve worked out pretty decent. And remember again, even the thickness of all the different furry feathers and the size and shapes of the feathers are very important, that we want to keep those in proportion, that depending on the thickness of the line here, then it should be the same here as far as what thickness of the brush I end up using. So just about this whole painting, I only used just a regular script brush, and then I used my thin glaze to blend the colors together. But most importantly, I used a transparent lock to get a lot of the values I wanted exactly. And then that way I could go back in and rework those specific areas just to get the finished product that I wanted. Right now, this one would probably be considered about finished. And I can actually put this in the complete column. And I hope you enjoyed this. So again, no matter what your subject matter, no matter what your style, consider the transparent lock to actually help you fine-tune those small shapes that will help you get the end result you're looking for. Thanks for watching. Until we see you out in the field or at the studio, bye for now.